In today's world, certain headlines weigh heavily on our hearts. An attack on a school reverberates far beyond a single campus. It rattles families, shakes neighbors, and reshapes how a community sees its future. What began as a quiet day at a small police training school turned into something far more jarring, an armed incident that left people injured and, according to some reports, dead. Authorities have secured the scene and opened an inquiry. At the center of that inquiry is a question that changes the meaning of the act itself. Was this violence driven, at least in part, by hostility toward a religious group? The setting was ordinary: classrooms, drill fields, young people preparing for roles of service. The actor was unexpectedly a student inside that world. The immediate facts are stark and unsettling. Beyond those facts, however, lie the harder questions about motive, about the networks and influences that led someone to violence, and about how a society should respond when belief or identity may have been targeted. Investigators approach this kind of case the way they do any serious crime. They collect evidence, interview witnesses, and analyze digital trails. Social media posts, private messages, search histories, and patterns of online behavior are examined for signs of radicalization or sustained hostility. Teachers, classmates, and family members are interviewed to build a picture of the student SS life and state of mind. In the United States, the distinction between a violent act and a hate crime matters legally. To add a hate crime charge, prosecutors must show that bias against a protected characteristic, such as religion, was a motivating factor. Proving motive in court is challenging. It often requires a mosaic of evidence rather than a single smoking gun. When the possibility of a religion-targeted attack emerges, the emotional stakes rise. Victims and their families deserve immediate support and clear answers. At the same time, investigators must be careful, methodical, and mindful of legal safeguards. The inquiry must be thorough without feeding rumor. Community leaders and public officials must reassure citizens while avoiding premature conclusions that could inflame tensions or unfairly stigmatize groups. This incident joins a painful pattern. Shootings at schools are a recurring nuisance in the United States, and each new event forces a familiar set of questions. How did this happen? Who failed to prevent it? And what can stop the next one? Yet, when religious bias is suspected, the debate broadens. It is no longer just about guns or mental illness. It becomes a conversation about intolerance, about whether some people are ever made to feel less safe because of what they believe. No single factor explains why a person commits such an act. Experts point to several recurring risk elements that can combine to produce violent behavior: intolerance and prejudice that normalize hostility toward a group, create fertile ground for targeted attacks. Untreated mental health struggles can impair judgment and increase impulsivity. Easy access to weapons transforms an impulse into a tragedy. Persuasive extremist narratives can offer a warped sense of purpose or justification. Social isolation and exclusion leave individuals without healthy support systems and more vulnerable to radical influences. In this case, investigators are looking at each of these possibilities alone and in combination to understand how a trajectory toward violence formed. The online world figures prominently in many modern investigations. Social platforms, private forums, and algorithmic feeds can amplify hostile rhetoric and place vulnerable individuals in echo chambers that nudge them toward more extreme content, a single search or casual share can lead to streams of dehumanizing language and explicit calls to violence. Yet reading intent in digital posts is difficult. Sarcasm, trolling, political hyperbole, and genuine calls for violence can look similar until investigators trace context and patterns over time. How the story is told matters. Responsible journalism focuses on verified facts, centers the needs of victims, and avoids lurid detail that might inspire imitators. Sensational headlines and repeated images of violence can give the attacker the notoriety they sought and deepen community trauma. Balanced reporting can inform citizens without amplifying fear by explaining legal standards, describing available resources for victims, and highlighting prevention strategies. Schools are both risk sites and prevention hubs. Educators often see warning signs first: withdrawal from peers, an obsession with violent content, repeated expressions of hate, or sudden changes in behavior. That makes investment in school-based mental health crucial. Counselors, peer support programs, anti-bullying initiatives, and clear protocols for reporting concerns can intercept troubling trajectories early. Restorative practices and peer mediation help repair harm and build a culture of accountability and belonging. Physical security measures, controlled access, trained staff have a role, but they must be balanced with a climate that fosters trust rather than fear. Families play a central role. Open, non-judgmental communication about friends, feelings, and online life creates a space where warning signs can be shared. Parents who know the apps their children use and who set reasonable boundaries on screen time and privacy are better equipped to spot risky shifts. When concerning behavior appears, early intervention, whether through conversation, counseling, or school coordination, is often more effective than waiting for a crisis. Communities must resist the rush to collective blame. When an attack is suspected to be religion-motivated, the instinct to point fingers can be strong, but blame directed at an entire group only deepens division and distracts from concrete measures that actually reduce harm. Instead, community leaders can model a calmer response, condemn violence clearly, support victims, cooperate with investigators, and use public forums to promote inclusion. Interfaith gatherings and public statements from diverse leaders send a clear message that hatred will not be normalized. Policy levers can make a difference. Thoughtful reforms that balance rights and safety include more robust background checks, red flag laws that provide legal means to temporarily remove weapons from individuals who pose a risk, and expanded funding for school and community mental health services. Laws that clearly define and enable prosecution of hate crimes help law enforcement recognize and respond to bias-motivated violence, but legal tools work best when paired with education and prevention programs. Support for victims is immediate and long-term. In the hours after an attack, survivors need medical care, crisis counseling, and practical support, from transportation to help navigating hospital systems. In the weeks and months that follow, counseling that is trauma-informed, legal assistance, and community support networks are critical to recovery. Vigils and memorials provide ritual space for grief and solidarity. Long-term resources, including scholarships or funds for affected families, can help rebuild stability. Prevention is practical and multifaceted. Schools can adopt clear reporting pathways and ensure staff are trained in recognizing and addressing concerning behavior. Community organizations can run mentorship programs and youth engagement projects that reduce isolation. Technology companies can improve moderation and fast-track channels for reporting violent content. Media outlets can follow responsible reporting guidelines to avoid amplifying harmful material. Together, these actions reduce the conditions under which bias and violence take root. Religious teachings across traditions offer robust resources for promoting peace and human dignity. Within Islam, for example, central texts stress the sanctity of life and the importance of justice and mercy. One frequently cited passage asserts, "Whoever kills a person, unless in retribution for murder or spreading corruption in the land, it is as though he has killed all of humanity." This statement underscores the profound value placed on life and is often invoked in interfaith conversations to reject violence unequivocally. Faith leaders have special influence. Sermons, youth programs, and public statements that consistently reject hatred and promote service and compassion shape how congregants understand conflict. When religious leaders collaborate across traditions to denounce violence and offer support to victims, they create an environment in which divisive narratives find fewer recruits. Interfaith youth initiatives, community service projects, and shared public events provide young people with relationships and experiences that counteract dehumanizing tropes. Balancing free expression with the need to prevent harm is delicate. Democracies protect broad speech rights, but most allow restrictions on direct incitement to violence. Platforms and communities must navigate this balance carefully, taking down content that explicitly calls for violence while preserving space for debate and dissent. Teaching media literacy in schools helps young people distinguish between legitimate critique and rhetoric that dehumanizes and escalates toward harm. Investigators in this case will likely continue to follow several parallel lines of inquiry. Digital footprints, patterns of interaction, prior disciplinary records, and any evidence of connections to extremist groups. They will examine whether victims were chosen because of a protected identity and whether the suspect expressed clear bias. If prosecutors pursue hate crime enhancements, they will need to present a body of evidence that ties motive to action. Throughout this process, authorities should strive for clear communication without compromising the investigation or endangering privacy. Timely, accurate updates calm speculation, excessive detail, or premature conclusions fuel rumor and anxiety. Transparency that respects victims' privacy and legal standards builds public trust and helps communities respond constructively. Recovery is not a single moment, but a long arc. Short-term support, medical care, crisis counseling, funerals, and memorials must be followed by sustained services. Ongoing therapy, school reintegration plans, and programs to support affected families. Community forums that include victims, leaders, and mental health professionals can help craft a shared path forward. Investing in prevention now reduces the likelihood of future harm. Citizens can take concrete actions without waiting for government changes. Talk to the young people in your life about their online experiences and friendships. Volunteer or advocate for counselors in your local schools. Attend or help organize interfaith events that foster mutual understanding, support trustworthy journalism, and discourage sensationalism. If you see content online that incites violence or dehumanizes a group, report it to the platform and, if necessary, to local authorities. Parents can adopt specific habits that increase safety. Ask about daily experiences. Be familiar with the apps and platforms children use. Set reasonable screen time and privacy rules. Encourage offline activities that build real-world friendships, and seek help early if they notice worrying behavioral changes. Schools can audit threat reporting protocols, ensure staff have trauma-informed training, and partner with community mental health services, technology companies should continue to improve moderation systems, transparency, and user reporting options. Automated systems can flag dangerous content, but human review, especially culturally aware moderation, reduces false positives and respects the context. Platforms can also work with researchers and civil society to create effective counter-speech programs and to direct vulnerable users to support resources. Programs that have shown promise are practical and community-rooted, peer mentoring that builds belonging, restorative justice, circles that repair harm and reduce retribution, interfaith youth exchanges that break stereotypes through personal contact, and after-school programs that keep young people engaged in constructive activities rather than isolated in online echo chambers. If prosecutors ultimately prove a bias motive and pursue hate crime charges, those convictions carry both practical and symbolic weight. Enhanced sentencing signals that society is unwilling to tolerate violence rooted in hatred, but beyond punishment, the legal outcome can catalyze education, community investment, and renewed prevention efforts that address the conditions behind the violence, avoid stigmatizing broader groups in the rush to assign cause, painting entire communities with the brush of guilt, deepens division, and obscures the targeted interventions that actually reduce risk, better mental health care, clearer reporting systems, improved online moderation, and strong community relationships. This case is a painful reminder of how fragile safety can be and how quickly personal grievance can turn into collective trauma. It also underlines a more hopeful truth. Prevention is possible when communities combine careful policing with compassionate support, when families talk and listen, when schools teach empathy and provide help, and when religious leaders model dignity and mercy. If you are worried about someone's behavior or believe someone might be planning violence, contact local law enforcement and mental health professionals immediately. If you or someone you know has been affected by this incident, seek medical and counseling resources and look for local organizations offering legal and practical support. By reaffirming justice, mercy, and the dignity of every person, communities can begin to heal. Choosing compassion over suspicion and action over despair reduces the odds that another family will face the sorrow this case has brought. We can and must do better. Yewu story.